My husband strictly forbade me from buying lottery tickets. It's a waste of money. But the day he left, I bought one for $2. That evening, I checked the numbers and won $81 million. I decided not to tell him what happened next. Good day, dear listeners. It's Maria again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please subscribe to my channel and like this video. And also, let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. People always say you don't notice the cage being built around you until the door is already locked. Looking back now, I think that's true. But at the time, I called it love. I called it partnership. I called it being a good wife. My name is Claire Merritt. I was 38 years old when everything changed. We lived in a cream-colored house on Dunmore Lane in a suburb of Columbus, Ohio. The kind of street where neighbors wave from driveways and nobody talks about what happens behind closed doors. I had a part-time job as a graphic designer working from a small corner of our home office, earning just enough to feel like I contributed. Derek handled the finances. Derek always handled the finances. We met in our late 20s at a work conference. He was charming then, the kind of man who remembered how you took your coffee and made you feel like the only person in a crowded room. We married after 14 months of dating. His mother, Pamela, cried at the wedding. Happy tears, I thought. I didn't yet understand that Pamela never cried out of happiness, only out of performance. The first years were fine, ordinary. We argued about small things, where to vacation, whose turn it was to call the plumber. But somewhere around year 4, the small arguments became something else. Derek didn't raise his voice. That was never his style. His control was quieter, more surgical. He would sigh in a certain way when I spent money without asking. He would review the credit card statement at the kitchen table, slowly, line by line, and ask me to explain each purchase with a tone that made me feel like a child being quizzed by a teacher who already knew I'd gotten the answers wrong. You don't need to understand the investments, he told me once when I asked about our savings accounts. You just need to trust me. I told myself it was efficiency, organization. Some men just like to be in charge of things. I had friends with messier marriages, affairs, drinking, screaming matches. Derek didn't do any of that, so I counted my blessings and stayed quiet. The lottery rule started 3 years ago. We were standing in a gas station in March. I remember because there was still snow on the ground, and I reached for a scratch card near the register, just for fun, just $2. Derek took it from my hand and placed it back on the rack, calmly, without a scene. That's not how we spend money, he said. In the car, he explained it properly, the way he always did, with logic that was hard to argue with, but somehow impossible to breathe around. Lotteries were statistically designed to extract money from people who couldn't do math. Buying tickets was a failure of financial discipline. It embarrassed him, frankly, when educated people fell for it. I didn't buy lottery tickets after that, not for 3 years. Then came the Thursday in October when Derek drove to Chicago for a 4-day industry conference. He kissed me at the door, reminded me not to use the joint card for anything unnecessary, and backed the Audi out of the driveway with the quiet confidence of a man who had every corner of his world arranged exactly as he liked. I stood in the doorway until he turned the corner. Then I exhaled. I didn't plan it. I want to be honest about that. I drove to the pharmacy to pick up my prescription, and there was a display of Powerball tickets near the register. A handwritten sign above it read, "Jackpot, $81 million." I looked at it for a moment. I thought about Derek's voice, the credit card statements, the sigh. I put $2 on the counter. "One quick pick," I said. The cashier, a teenage girl with pink earrings, smiled at me. "Good luck." I folded the ticket into my wallet between two old receipts and didn't think about it again for the rest of the day. That evening, after dinner, I was sitting on the couch with a glass of wine and my laptop open to a design project. Almost out of habit, I opened a new tab and typed in the Powerball website. The winning numbers for Thursday, October 12th, were posted in bold at the top of the page. I looked at my ticket. I looked at the screen. I looked at my ticket again. My hand was shaking so badly that I knocked the wine glass and it tipped sideways across the coffee table, red spreading across the edge of my design magazine. I didn't move to clean it up. I just sat there, holding a paper rectangle worth $81 million in a house where I had to explain why I bought a $7 candle. For a long time, I don't know how long, maybe 20 minutes, maybe an hour. I didn't move. I didn't call anyone. I didn't make a sound. I just sat in the silence of my own house and felt something enormous shifting inside me. Not joy. Not yet. Something more complicated than that. Something that felt, for the first time in years, like possibility. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in our bed, in the center of it, because Derek wasn't there to take his side, and stared at the ceiling while my mind worked through everything with a cold, almost detached precision I didn't know I was capable of. The ticket was hidden inside the back cover of a paperback novel on my nightstand, a book Derek had never touched. The irony felt almost too neat. By 3 a.m, I had stopped thinking about the money itself and started thinking about something far more complicated. Derek. Here was the truth that I turned over and over in the dark. If I told him, the money would not be mine. That sounds harsh, written out like that. But I had been in this marriage long enough to understand exactly how it functioned. Derek managed everything. Derek decided everything. In 14 years of marriage, I had never had sole access to more than the small checking account where my freelance income was deposited, an account he reviewed with the same quarterly attention he gave the utility bills. If I walked downstairs and called him in Chicago and said, "Derek, I won $81 million, the first thing he would do, before congratulating me, before asking if I was okay, would be to start planning. And once Derek started planning, I would be a passenger again. A grateful, comfortable, nicely dressed passenger who didn't need to understand the investments. I thought about our 14 years together with the strange clarity that comes at 3 a.m. when you are finally being honest with yourself. I thought about the vacation I had wanted to take to Portugal 5 years ago, a sketched-out itinerary I'd spent weeks researching, and how Derek had replaced it with a corporate retreat in Scottsdale because it was a better use of the time. I thought about the design studio I had once considered opening, the business plan I'd worked on for months, and how Derek had reviewed it over dinner one night and said gently that the risk wasn't reasonable given our financial position. I thought about my sister Dana, who lived in Portland, who I called less and less because Derek found her destabilizing. I thought about 100 small surrenders I had made over the years, each one reasonable in isolation, each one perfectly sensible, which together had added up to a life that was organized entirely around someone else's preferences. I was not a victim. I want to be clear about that. No one had forced me. But somewhere along the way, I had stopped being a full person and become, instead, an appendage to someone else's carefully managed life. The question was, what did I do now? I got up at 4 and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with a notepad. I needed to think clearly. Emotionally, I was a flood. Terror and excitement and grief and something that felt dangerously close to hope, all churning together. But I had always been good at separating feeling from function when I needed to. I had learned that, too, from years with Derek. First, the ticket. Powerball jackpots in Ohio could be claimed up to 180 days from the draw date. I had time. I did not need to rush, and rushing would be the worst thing I could do. Second, if I claimed the prize, it would be public record. Ohio lottery winners could not remain entirely anonymous. The Lottery Commission had the right to release at minimum my name and the amount. Derek would find out. His mother, Pamela, would find out. The entire Merritt family, who already treated me as a slightly inadequate addition to their bloodline, would find out. Third, Derek and I had no prenuptial agreement. In Ohio, lottery winnings won during a marriage were legally considered marital property, subject to division in divorce. If I claimed this money while still married to Derek Merritt, he would be entitled to a portion of it. I put my pen down and looked at the steam rising from my coffee cup. I was going to need help. Professional help. The kind that operated under strict confidentiality. By 6 in the morning, the plan was simple but solid in its outline. I would not tell Derek. Not yet. Not until I understood every legal implication of this ticket and had positioned myself correctly. I would find a family law attorney, someone outside our social circle, someone Derek had never heard of. I would find a financial advisor who specialized in sudden wealth, and I would, quietly and without drama, begin to understand what my options actually were. I also added something to the list that I had not consciously decided, but that I realized was already decided somewhere deeper than thought. I was going to find out, honestly and completely, what my marriage was. Not what I'd told myself it was. Not what it looked like from the outside. What it actually was. I tucked the notepad into my laptop bag, finished my coffee, and went upstairs to shower. When I came back downstairs, the morning light was coming through the kitchen windows, and the red wine stain on the magazine had dried to a dark rust color. I photographed the lottery ticket from multiple angles on my phone. Then I drove to a 24-hour FedEx and made 3 photocopies, which I placed in separate envelopes. One went into my car's glove compartment. One I mailed to myself at Dana's address in Portland. One I kept in my wallet. The original ticket went back into the novel on my nightstand. I was 38 years old. I had $81 million hidden in a paperback book, and for the first time in a very long time, I was paying attention. The attorney's name was Sandra Kowalski. I found her through a legal directory, specifically searching for family law specialists in Dublin, Ohio, far enough from our neighborhood that I was unlikely to run into anyone who knew us, close enough to reach without inventing elaborate excuses for being gone. Her office was on the 2nd floor of a brick building above a dental clinic, quiet and entirely anonymous, exactly what I needed. I called from my car, parked in the lot of a grocery store I never normally used, with the engine running and the radio off. "I need a consultation," I said. "Confidential." "All our consultations are confidential," the receptionist said. "That's standard." "I need it to be particularly confidential." There was a brief pause. "I understand. We can see you Thursday at 2. Derek came home from Chicago on Sunday night. He walked through the door, set his bag in the hall, accepted my hug with the brief, routine affection of a man who has been away 4 days and is mostly thinking about dinner. He smelled like hotel soap and something else, something faint that I cataloged in the back of my mind and kept moving. Dinner was quiet in the way our dinners were often quiet, not uncomfortable, but not warm either. He told me about the conference. I listened and asked questions and smiled at the right moments. I had become very skilled at this particular performance over the years. I thought about the ticket in my novel on the nightstand and felt the strangest sensation. Not guilt exactly, but something adjacent to it. The feeling of knowing something that changes everything while standing in a room that doesn't know it yet. I kept my Thursday appointment. Sandra Kowalski was in her mid-50s, with reading glasses pushed up on her head and the brisk, no-nonsense manner of someone who had heard every conceivable domestic situation and been surprised by none of them. I sat across from her desk and told her everything: the ticket, the amount, the marriage, the financial structure Derek had built around us over the years. She listened without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she set down her pen. "Ohio is an equitable distribution state," she said. "Lottery winnings acquired during marriage are generally considered marital property. However, and this matters, equitable does not mean equal. The court considers many factors: your contributions to the marriage, the length of the marriage, the source of the ticket purchase." She paused. "You paid for it yourself, with your own money?" "My freelance account," I said. "He doesn't have access to that account." She made a note. "That's helpful. But my strongest advice right now is this: do not claim that ticket yet, and do not tell your husband. Come back to me after you've had time to make some decisions about the direction you want this to go. Do you understand what I mean by that?" I understood exactly what she meant. I had 2 more appointments that week: a financial advisor named Gerald Park, who specialized in sudden wealth management and worked out of a downtown office, and a private investigator named Tom Briggs, whose card I had found online and who came recommended on a forum for women in complicated marriages that I had discovered at 2 in the morning, 3 days after finding the ticket. Tom Briggs was the appointment that changed things. I had hired him on a hunch. That smell when Derek came home from Chicago, the hotel soap and the other thing. The fact that Derek had attended this same Chicago conference every October for the past 4 years, always alone, always 4 nights. The way he checked his phone sometimes, not frantically, but with a particular quiet attention that I had never been able to name until now. Tom called me on a Wednesday, 8 days after I'd hired him. "Mrs. Merritt," he said, "I have something for you. Are you somewhere private?" I was in my car in a parking garage downtown. "Yes," I said. "Your husband has been in a relationship with a woman named Kristen Hale for approximately 2 years. She lives in a condo in the short north. He visits her on average twice a week, usually Tuesday and Thursday evenings, when he tells you he has late client meetings," I said. My voice sounded very far away. "Yes, I have photographs, dates, times, locations. I also have—" He paused. "Mrs. Merritt, I also found that he used a joint savings account to pay for a weekend trip to New York last February. The account appears to be one you're listed on jointly." I sat in the parking garage for a long time after I hung up. The concrete around me was gray and close, and somewhere below me a car alarm was going off, distant and insistent. I thought about February. Derek had told me the New York trip was a financial seminar. He'd brought me back a keychain with the Statue of Liberty on it. I had put it on my keys and thanked him. I took it off my keys when I got home that evening and dropped it in the trash under the kitchen sink. The first direct proof, the point of no return. I called Sandra Kowalski the next morning and told her I had made my decision. "I want to file for divorce," I said, "and I want to do it right." Sandra moved quickly once I gave her the word. The process was more layered than I had imagined, and the complexity was, in a strange way, a comfort. Each step gave me something concrete to do, and doing things kept the emotional weight from becoming unbearable. Gerald Park helped me open a personal account at a bank in a different district, funded initially by a portion of my freelance earnings, transferred over several weeks in amounts small enough not to trigger immediate notice. He connected me with a lottery attorney in Columbus, a quiet, methodical man named Arthur Feld, who had handled a handful of high-value jackpot cases and knew exactly how to prepare a claim that would minimize public exposure as much as Ohio law allowed. I claimed the ticket on a gray Tuesday morning in November. I wore no jewelry and pulled my hair back and drove myself there alone. The Lottery Commission office smelled like fluorescent lighting and government carpeting. I signed papers. I shook hands. I drove home. $81 million minus federal and state tax would be deposited in installments into a newly established trust, the Merritt Holloway Family Trust, named for my maiden name, which I had not used in 14 years and which now felt like reclaiming something. Arthur and Gerald had set it up carefully. Sandra had reviewed it. Every door Derek might have walked through was quietly, legally closed. I filed for divorce on a Thursday. Derek was served the papers on a Friday afternoon at his office. I know this because Sandra's process server confirmed it at 4:17 p.m. I was sitting in my kitchen making tea when my phone rang at 4:31. Derek didn't shout. He never shouted. But his voice on the phone was something I had never heard before, stripped of its usual polish, raw at the edges, like metal after the plating comes off. "What is this?" he said. It wasn't a question. "You've been served divorce papers," I said. "Sandra Kowalski is my attorney. Please direct any questions to her." "Claire." His voice shifted. The rawness was replaced by something controlled, almost gentle. The register he used when he was managing a situation. "Claire, this is not, we need to talk about this. Whatever you think is happening." "I know about Kristen Hale," I said. Silence. Then, "I'd like you to reconsider." "Goodbye, Derek," I said, and ended the call. I put the phone down on the counter and discovered that my hands were perfectly steady. I had expected them to shake. They didn't. What came next was not Derek's doing alone. It was Pamela. I had always known that Pamela Merritt was the more dangerous of the two. Derek was controlled, but his control was fundamentally self-interested. It came from a desire for order and a belief that he knew best. Pamela's control was different. It was tribal. I had never truly belonged to her tribe, and she had been tolerating me for 14 years, the way you tolerate a draft in a room. A minor discomfort that you eventually plan to address. She arrived at my door on Saturday morning without calling. I saw her car in the driveway through the upstairs window and took a slow breath before going down. She was standing on the porch in a camel coat, her handbag held in front of her like a shield. Beside her, because of course, was Derek's older brother, Ryan. Broad-shouldered and quiet, present purely for physical emphasis. "We need to have a conversation," Pamela said when I opened the door. "I don't think we do," I said pleasantly. "Claire." She stepped closer. "Whatever Derek has or hasn't done, you are not thinking clearly. A divorce will destroy this family, and I want you to understand something very clearly." She paused in a way that was clearly rehearsed. "We know about the money." My face did not change. I had prepared for this, or I had prepared for the possibility of it. I wasn't certain how they'd found out, but I had understood it was a risk. "I don't know what you're referring to," I said. "Don't." Her voice sharpened. "The lottery. Derek found the photocopies in the car. The glove compartment, Claire. He recognized the ticket format. He had someone look into it." She let that sit for a moment. $81 million is marital property in this state. You know that. Sandra Kowalski knows that. And if you proceed with this divorce, we will make absolutely certain that every cent is contested. We have resources, Claire. We have attorneys who will tie this up for years. You will spend a decade in litigation and come out the other end with nothing. It was a speech designed to make a person fold. I recognized it because it was the same speech, in different forms, that had been delivered to me for 14 years in 100 different situations. "My attorney will be in touch," I said, and I closed the door. I leaned against it in the hallway in the quiet of the house and allowed myself 30 seconds of pure, undiluted fear. They were not bluffing. They had resources. This would not be clean. Then I picked up my phone and called Sandra. After that, I packed a bag, drove to a hotel in Worthington, a quiet Marriott with a pool I never used, and spent 4 days doing almost nothing. I ordered room service. I watched old films on my laptop. I slept 9 hours a night. I called Dana in Portland and talked for 2 hours and told her everything. She cried. I didn't, but only because I had been crying quietly in the car on the way to the hotel and had, for the moment, run out. I needed those 4 days. The fight ahead was going to require everything I had. Derek called 14 times during those 4 days at the hotel. I watched his name appear on my screen and let it ring through to voicemail each time. On the second day, he left a message that I played only once. His voice was soft, almost tender, in the way it sometimes had been in the early years of our marriage, and he said he missed me and that we should talk, really talk, the way we hadn't in a long time, and that whatever he had done, he was willing to work on it. He said the word us 3 times in 4 minutes. I deleted the message. It wasn't that I felt nothing. That would be easier to explain, and also false. I felt a great deal. The particular ache of recognizing love that had once been genuine, or at least had genuinely resembled love, and understanding that it had been slowly and quietly replaced by something that only wore love's clothing. Grief and anger are not opposites. They live in the same room, and I had learned to let them coexist without letting either one make decisions. On the 3rd day, I drove to Portland. Dana met me at the airport in her old Subaru with a thermos of coffee and the expression of someone who had been waiting a long time to say "I told you so" and was choosing, out of love, not to. We drove to her house in Northeast Portland and sat in her kitchen until 2 in the morning. Her husband, Marcus, made us pasta and then tactfully went to bed. Dana and I talked about everything. About Derek's control and how gradually it had been built, how I had mistaken architecture for shelter, about the ticket and the fear and the plan, about Pamela on my porch, like something carved from expensive disappointment. "You know what I kept thinking?" I said at one point. "That I should be grateful, that I had a nice house and a stable life, and I should stop wanting more." "He taught you to think that," Dana said quietly. I didn't argue. On my last day in Portland, Dana drove me to a meeting she attended on Thursday evenings, a support group for women navigating difficult life transitions. The room was a church basement, which I had expected to find depressing, but it wasn't. It was warm and smelled like coffee, and someone had brought homemade lemon bars. There were 9 women there, ranging from their late 20s to their mid-60s. I didn't share anything that first evening, I just listened. But what I heard, the specific various texture of other women's quiet survival, did something to me that I can only describe as structural, like a building being reinforced from the inside. There was a woman named Judith, 61, who had rebuilt her entire life at 58 after her husband of 30 years had siphoned their retirement accounts. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and spoke without bitterness, which was the most remarkable thing about her. She had simply understood at some point that anger was a fire that consumed the house you were trying to build, and she had directed her energy elsewhere. The hardest part, Judith told me afterward over coffee at a folding table, is the moment you realize that surviving them is the best revenge there is, and then it stops feeling like revenge at all. It just feels like living. I flew back to Columbus on Sunday. I did not return to Dunmore Lane. I had arranged, through Sandra, for a structured period of separation. Derek had been advised by his own attorneys to vacate the house temporarily, which he had done, predictably, by moving in with Pamela in her house in Upper Arlington. I went back to the cream-colored house and walked through the rooms and felt the weight of 14 years in every corner. I called a moving company the following morning and arranged for my personal belongings, my design equipment, my books, my clothes, my grandmother's china, to be moved to an apartment I had signed a lease on in the short north, a 3-bedroom on the top floor with large windows and a view of the city that I had chosen specifically because it was nothing like anything Derek would have chosen. Sandra called that afternoon with an update. The discovery process had begun. Derek's attorneys were, as Pamela had promised, prepared to contest the lottery winnings as marital property. They're going to argue duration of marriage and commingled finances, Sandra told me. But Arthur has a strong argument on the ticket. You purchased it independently with separate funds. We also have a very detailed picture of the marital financial structure, sir, which, frankly, works significantly in your favor. What does that mean? I asked. It means the court will see a 14-year marriage in which one party systematically controlled all major financial decisions and resources. That matters for equitable distribution. Add the documented infidelity, which affects the misconduct argument in Ohio. She paused. Claire, I want you to feel encouraged. This is not going to be quick, but it is going to go well. I stood at my new window and looked at the city below. Columbus in November. Bare trees and cold light, and the particular energy of a place that keeps moving regardless of what happens to any individual inside it. I felt, for the first time since October, something that was recognizably peace. Not certainty, not safety, but peace. It would have to be enough for now. They came on a Sunday in December. I had been in my new apartment for 3 weeks, and I had begun, carefully and deliberately, to make it mine. I had hung prints on the walls, bold, colorful things that Derek would have called distracting. I had bought a second-hand armchair in a rust-red fabric that I loved unreasonably. I had discovered that the coffee shop on the corner opened at 6:30, which suited me perfectly, and I had developed a habit of sitting there in the early mornings with my laptop and a flat white, working on design projects and watching the street wake up. I was almost happy. Almost. Because the legal process hummed beneath everything like a low-frequency sound that you couldn't quite tune out. Then Pamela called. I'd like to come and see you, she said. Her voice was different than it had been on the porch, softer, more carefully modulated. Alone. Just to talk. I think we've both said some things that came out wrong, and I'd like to start over. Every instinct I had said no. But Sandra had advised me, in situations like this, to keep channels of communication open and document everything. Closed doors became closed evidence. You can come Sunday at 2, I said, but not Derek. She arrived at 2 with a hostess gift, a bottle of wine, and without Ryan, which was a studied gesture meant to convey vulnerability. She was wearing softer colors than usual, a pale gray cashmere sweater, and she had left her armor handbag at home in favor of a smaller, gentler clutch. But I knew Pamela. I had known her for 14 years. We sat in the living room, my living room, with my rust-red chair and my colorful prints, and she accepted tea and began. Derek is devastated, she said. I know he hasn't been perfect. I'm his mother. I don't have illusions. But he loves you, Claire. This what you're doing. I think it comes from a place of hurt, and I understand that. But I'm asking you to consider what you're throwing away. I'm not throwing anything away, I said. I'm choosing something different. She nodded slowly as if this were a reasonable thing that she was taking seriously. I want to talk about the money, she said after a moment. I know this is uncomfortable, but I think, and I say this with love, that the money is affecting your thinking. $81 million is an extraordinary thing to absorb. It would affect anyone. And I think you may be making permanent decisions based on temporary feelings. Temporary feelings. The phrase was beautifully constructed. It pathologized clarity and reframed independence as instability. My thinking is quite clear, I said. Claire. She leaned forward slightly. The family is willing to be generous. Derek's attorney has indicated, and I'm speaking to you outside that process right now, just woman to woman, that there could be a settlement, a fair one, something that doesn't drag both of you through years of litigation, something that lets you move forward with dignity and with resources. She paused. All it requires is that you agree to a division that reflects the fact that this was a marriage, a partnership. There it was. Under the cashmere sweater and the soft colors, the same transaction it had always been. Sign over half and we'll let you leave quietly. I have an attorney, I said. Her name is Sandra Kowalski. You have her contact information. Pamela's expression didn't change exactly, but something behind her eyes did. A door closing, a temperature dropping. You are making a mistake, she said quietly. Not a plea, a pronouncement. Perhaps, I said. Thank you for the wine. She left at 3:15. I closed the door and stood in my hallway for a long moment. The fear was there. I won't pretend it wasn't. Pamela was not a woman who accepted being sent away. Derek's family had money and connections in Columbus that ran deep, and litigation was not an abstract threat. It could genuinely take years. It could cost money I hadn't yet received. It could become the central organizing fact of my life for a long time. But here was the thing I had discovered. Somewhere between the parking garage in November and the church basement in Portland, fear could be a fuel. The question was only which direction you pointed it. I poured myself a glass of water, not the wine. I didn't open that bottle. I put it under the sink beside the Statue of Liberty keychain I had never quite gotten around to throwing away. And I called Sandra and told her everything about the conversation, detail by detail, as she had instructed me to do. Good, Sandra said when I was done. Don't respond to any further contact from Pamela directly. And Claire. A brief pause. You're doing the right thing. I've been doing this for 22 years. The ones who hold the line are the ones who come out whole. I sat by my window afterward in my rust-red chair and watched the December street below. Hold the line. I could do that. The hearing was set for the second Tuesday of February. Family Court, Franklin County. Room 14B, which was unremarkable and fluorescent and smelled, like all courtrooms, of paper and anxious waiting. Sandra and Arthur sat on my side of the aisle. Derek's team sat on the other. 2 attorneys, both senior partners at a downtown firm whose letterhead I had seen on 4 separate motions in the preceding months, each one designed to delay, complicate, and exhaust. Derek sat at his table in a navy suit I recognized. He looked smaller than I remembered him, somehow. Not physically. He was the same height, the same build, but something about the context of a courtroom reduced him. Here, his careful management of appearances could only go so far. Pamela was in the gallery in the front row, which was the maximum she was permitted. She wore black, which I suspected was deliberate. The core issues before the judge were two: the lottery winnings and the marital estate division, including the Dunmore Lane property, the investment accounts, and the question of Derek's financial misconduct during the marriage. Sandra had spent 3 months building the second argument with the precision of an architect: the documented infidelity, the New York trip funded from a joint account, the pattern of financial control, bank records, account histories, my freelance deposits and his quarterly reviews of them, laid out in clean, organized exhibits. Derek's attorneys opened by arguing that the lottery ticket, regardless of how it was purchased, represented a marital asset under Ohio law. They were not wrong that this was a legally arguable position, but Arthur's counter-argument was elegant and thoroughly sourced. The ticket was purchased with separate funds from a personal account that Derek had never contributed to and to which he had no access. The marital financial structure had, in fact, been constructed specifically to exclude Claire Merritt from independent financial agency, granting him claim over the one asset she had ever acquired independently would, Arthur argued, complete a picture of financial control that the court was already looking at in the misconduct evidence. The judge, the Honorable Patricia Wren, was a woman in her early 60s with reading glasses and a manner that communicated nothing but was somehow nevertheless warm. She listened to both sides with complete attention and asked precise, unhurried questions. Then came the moment that I had not planned for, but that Sandra had warned me might happen. Derek took the stand. He was good. I had always known he was good at this, at presentation, at composure, at making a reasonable, considered, sympathetic impression. He described our marriage as a partnership in which he had handled finances because he was better positioned to do so, and never out of any desire to control. He described the Kristen Hale situation with visible, managed remorse. He acknowledged it, which his attorneys had clearly advised, because fighting it was pointless given Tom Briggs's photographs. He presented himself as a flawed man who had made a terrible mistake and who was asking only for fairness. It might have worked in a different room, but Sandra cross-examined him. I had seen Sandra work before, in depositions, in preliminary hearings, but I had never seen her in full motion, and it was something to witness. She was not theatrical. She didn't raise her voice or play to the gallery. She simply moved through the evidence with a methodical, unhurried certainty that made Derek's careful composure begin, over the course of 45 minutes, to develop small cracks. She introduced the joint account statement for February the New York weekend. Derek acknowledged it. She introduced phone records showing communication with Kristen Hale dating back 27 months, including during a period when he had told me he was at a financial seminar in Cincinnati. Derek acknowledged it. She introduced 3 years of transaction records from my personal freelance account, demonstrating consistent quarterly reviews he had conducted without my knowledge using shared accounting software he had installed on our home computer, reviews he had never disclosed. Derek's composure slipped, just slightly, as he realized where she was going. "Mr. Merritt," Sandra said, her voice perfectly even, "you have stated that your management of the marital finances was a practical arrangement based on competency. Would you say it was also consensual?" "Of course," Derek said. "Were you aware," Sandra continued, holding up a document, "that your wife researched and submitted a business plan to 3 separate lending institutions in 2019, all of which were rejected following receipt of a credit inquiry that your name appears on?" Derek blinked. I reviewed her business plan, yes. I asked about the credit inquiry, Mr. Merritt." The crack widened. In the gallery, I heard Pamela's handbag hit the floor and the brief shuffle as she retrieved it. He didn't have a clean answer. His attorney objected. The judge overruled. By the time Sandra sat down, Derek's composure was intact only in its surface layer. The suit, the posture, the controlled breathing. Underneath, something had shifted in the room. The shape of the marriage, as he had presented it, no longer quite fit the shape of the evidence. I sat very still through all of it. Sandra had told me not to react, not to the lies, not to the moments when his version of our life made me want to say that is not what happened. I sat with my hands folded on the table and my face neutral, and I let the evidence speak instead. At one point, Derek looked across the room at me. I don't know what he expected to see. Perhaps the version of me he had known. Careful, self-effacing, afraid of the sigh. What he found was simply a woman looking back at him with no particular expression at all. He looked away first. Judge Wren recessed at 4:30 and announced that she would issue her ruling within 30 days. I walked out of the courthouse into the cold February air and stood on the steps and breathed. Sandra came and stood beside me. "Well," she said. "Well," I said. We didn't need to say anything else. Judge Wren issued her ruling on March 3rd. Sandra called me at 9 in the morning, which told me something before she even spoke. Sandra was a measured woman who did not make unnecessary calls early. "Claire," she said, "it's a good day." I was in the coffee shop on the corner when she called, my flat white going cold in front of me, my laptop open to a design project I had not been able to focus on for a week. I walked out onto the sidewalk into the cold morning air and listened. The ruling was comprehensive and, in the language of the court, final. The lottery winnings, all $81 million before tax, were awarded entirely to Claire Merritt as separate property, on the basis that the ticket was purchased with demonstrably separate funds, that the marital financial structure had systematically excluded the claimant from independent financial agency, and that awarding any portion to Derek Merritt would represent an inequitable outcome given the documented pattern of financial control and misconduct within the marriage. The Dunmore Lane property was to be sold with the proceeds divided, 60% to Claire, 40% to Derek, reflecting her greater non-financial contributions to the household over the course of the marriage. The investment accounts were to be divided in the same proportion. Derek was ordered to pay a portion of Sandra's and Arthur's legal fees. The documented infidelity, the credit inquiry sabotage of my 2019 business plan, and the unauthorized monitoring of my personal accounts had all been entered into the record. None of it would disappear. I sat down on a bench on the sidewalk outside the coffee shop, not because I needed to, but because my legs suggested it might be wise, and put my phone in my lap and looked at the street. A woman walked by with a dog. A delivery truck pulled up across the street. Two kids in school uniforms argued about something small and important. The world continued at its ordinary pace, perfectly indifferent to the fact that everything in mine had just rearranged itself permanently. Derek called that afternoon. I let it go to voicemail. His attorney called Sandra. His message, relayed through the proper channels, was that he intended to appeal. Arthur reviewed the ruling carefully. "He can file," he told me, "but the evidentiary record is solid. An appeal would require demonstrating that Judge Wren made a legal error, not simply that he disagrees with the outcome. Given what's in the transcript," he paused diplomatically, "I would be surprised if it went anywhere." Derek filed the appeal in April. It was dismissed in June. Pamela did not call again. She did not come to my door. I heard through Dana, who had reconnected with someone from our old social circle, that Pamela was telling people in Upper Arlington that the divorce had been a shock to the entire family, and that Claire had simply changed after the money, as if the money were a pathogen that had entered an otherwise healthy system and corrupted it. I found this interesting as a theory. It required believing that I had been perfectly content until the moment I became financially independent, at which point I had suddenly developed opinions and boundaries, and a lawyer. I finished moving into the Short North apartment properly in April. I had been living out of boxes in a kind of provisional state while the legal process played out, unwilling to fully commit to this life until I knew the shape of it. After June, I unpacked everything. I put my grandmother's china in the kitchen cabinet where I could see it every day. I called Dana the night the appeal was dismissed. "It's over," I said. "It's over," she said. Then she said, "How do you feel?" And I sat with that for a moment because I wanted to answer it honestly. Not the answer that sounded right, not relieved or triumphant or the various emotions that the situation seemed to call for. The actual answer. "I feel like myself," I said. "I feel like the version of me that existed before I learned to make myself smaller to fit into someone else's idea of a life." Dana didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "I've been waiting 14 years to hear you say something like that." I laughed. Not the careful, managed laugh I had practiced for years at dinner tables. The real one. The loud one. "I know," I said. "I'm sorry it took this long." "Don't apologize," she said. "Just keep going." I intended to. The months after the ruling moved differently than any months I had known before. This is the part of the story where I am supposed to describe a dramatic transformation, a new wardrobe, a trip to Paris, a sequence of glamorous events that announce to the world that everything has changed. But the truth is quieter than that and, I think, more interesting. I rebuilt my design business. Not the cautious, part-time arrangement I'd maintained during the marriage, but something real and serious. I rented studio space, a bright loft 2 blocks from my apartment, with industrial windows and exposed brick and room for 2 employees. I hired a project manager named Tess, who was 26 and frighteningly capable, and a junior designer named Marcus, who was fresh out of Canadian dollars and reminded me of the person I had been at his age before I had learned to keep my ideas quiet. Within 18 months, we had taken on 3 substantial corporate clients and won a regional design award that I displayed on the studio wall with quiet, genuine satisfaction. Gerald Park and I worked carefully and methodically on the lottery funds. The money went largely into a diversified portfolio, a charitable foundation I established in my grandmother's name, focused on financial literacy programs for women, and a series of thoughtful investments that Gerald described approvingly as built to last. I gave Dana and Marcus a gift large enough to pay off their mortgage and fund 3 years of the graduate degree Dana had always wanted but kept postponing. I told her it wasn't charity. It was a down payment on the life she should have been living. I kept the apartment in the Short North. I added a proper espresso machine, a reading chair by the window, and a shelf for the books I was finally getting around to, the ones about art history and philosophy and travel that Derek had found impractical. I took a trip to Portugal in the summer, where I had wanted to go 5 years ago before Derek replaced it with a corporate retreat in Scottsdale. I went alone, spent 10 days walking through Lisbon and sitting in outdoor cafes, watching the light on the Tagus River and being, without apology, entirely present in my own life. I joined Judith's group, a Thursday evening meeting in Columbus, similar to the one in Portland. By then I didn't go for the support. I went to give it. And what of Derek? The appeal's dismissal had cost him significantly in legal fees. His portion of the Dunmore Lane sale and the investment split left him with a reasonable settlement. He was not destitute, but Derek's relationship with money had always been about control, and losing control of the largest financial event of his proximity was something he seemed unable to recover from psychologically. His relationship with Kristen Hale, briefly formalized after our divorce, ended within a year. I heard through the residue of our old social circle that he had taken a position at a smaller firm in Cincinnati, a lateral move that those who knew him understood as a step down. He remarried 2 years later. I genuinely wished him, from a careful distance, something approaching contentment. Wishing him ill required more ongoing attention than I was willing to give. Pamela was a different story. Pamela's certainty that she understood how the world worked had been, it turned out, the engine of her undoing in ways that had nothing to do with me. The same autumn our divorce was finalized, a woman Derek's brother Ryan had been quietly paying off for 3 years, decided to stop being quiet. The resulting family scandal unfolded in Upper Arlington social circles with the particular brutality of events that happen in small, status-conscious communities where everyone has been pretending for too long. Pamela stepped back from several charitable board positions. The Christmas party she had hosted annually for 30 years did not happen that year or the year after. I thought about her on the porch of my old house in her camel coat, saying you were making a mistake. I thought about how certain she had been. I thought about Judith's voice in that church basement. Surviving them is the best revenge there is, and then it stops feeling like revenge at all. She was right. It had stopped. I sat in my studio one evening in October, exactly a year after I had bought a $2 lottery ticket at a pharmacy, and looked out the industrial windows at the Columbus evening and the rust-colored leaves on the street below, and felt the specific, unperformable quality of a life that is genuinely, fully, uncomplicatedly your own. I thought about the girl I had been at 28, standing at a window at a work conference in a dress I liked, before a charming man appeared and gradually convinced me, over 14 years, that my taste in windows was probably not to be trusted. I thought about what I would tell her if I could. Pay attention, I would say. Not to what he tells you the world is. To what you already know it can be. I spent 14 years learning to make myself smaller. It took one $2 lottery ticket and the courage to hold a line to get myself back. The money didn't change me. It just gave me the space to become who I had always been. If I learned anything, it's this. Control dressed as love is still a cage. Financial dependence is not partnership. And the life you almost settled for, that is the real loss, not the one you walked away from. What would you have done? Would you have told him? Would you have walked away? Would you have had the courage to hold the line when everything was on it? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below. It means more than you know. And if this story stayed with you, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here.